Adorable.
Did you want to lead the pledge?
Right, exactly.
All right.
Should we get started?
Yes, let's call it.
All right, so we'll call to order. 10:30 on the dot. We're going to do a roll call.
Sure. Hennessy?
Here.
Larson?
Here.
Okay, pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Take a look at the agenda. Do you have anything you want to move around, switch, add, change?
No, I wrote. Nope, I do not.
Okay. All right. So the first thing is approval of the minutes. I had a chance to read through them already. I didn't see any changes. Did you have any?
Changes either?
I did have one question though. It's been a while. As I was reading through, I realized how long it had been since our last policy meeting. I didn't know if maybe we wanted to change how we approve these minutes, just because it was a while from the last meeting. So
September and December.
So I just didn't know if maybe we should maybe get them. I was just having a hard time recalling, and so even if we didn't necessarily approve them, if maybe we could get them a little bit sooner after, as soon as you put them together, and that way if we have changes, I can have a better recollection of the meeting. Is that?
So like within a couple weeks of the meeting, they come back?
That's what I was thinking. And then, because it also has, the signatures are Max and Merle, so I didn't know if we want them to be the ones who approve these, or if the committee's going to approve those.
That's not clear to me.
Yeah, I can find out.
Yeah.
So
We did at one point, I feel like summer, early fall, have a discussion, I believe, with the full board. And I feel like, so I'm going by my memory here, that the thought was that the committee minutes need to go back to the committee to
Right.
be approved. I don't recall a
I think that
conversation
makes
about the
sense,
signatures.
yes,
I can
because
find out.
nobody else is here to
I would
really.
agree. Yes.
So I don't have a problem with that. I just didn't know if procedurally when you wanted to change the secretary or the signatures, because
So they go to the committee people.
right.
Yes. It's a good notion.
And then I wouldn't mind just seeing them so that if there are changes, I can record those before the next, so I don't forget in cases where it's.
John, is it
month
feasible
and a
to
half.
get them out like within two, I mean, even 14 days or whatever, I'm not.
Yeah.
Let me follow up on who should and
Sign
can sign them.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. But even if they still need to sign them, that's fine. At least we can
We will know.
send it to them with our approval or our consent that it seemed like what was recorded in the meeting. Because I don't know how they would know. Okay, so we want to approve the minutes?
I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
I'll second.
Did we approve the agenda?
Oh, I guess we didn't do the formal. Want to amend? I'll make a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Motion to approve the minutes on the table. I'll second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Public comment. Do we have any? Looks like we might. Great. Jane.
Didn't really know what policy meeting was like, but I can't often come at night, so I thought I would get my feelings out here today when this meeting is more conducive for my time. So thank you for your service to our schools, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. I watch and listen to most meetings from home. For years, I've spent many hours volunteering in our schools. I have friends who are teachers in the district, and both my parents are retired educators who served a majority of their careers in this district. So I feel like I have a good pulse of what's going on in the schools. We currently have a freshman, 6th grader, 3rd grader, and we really could not be happier with each of their experiences this year. At the last meeting, I found it refreshing to hear from the MSEA about how smoothly the buildings are operating this year. Given all the policies being presented and the negativity surrounding this board, one might be led to believe otherwise. To say there have been a few new policies proposed this year might be considered an understatement. Some of the changes proposed have been great collaborative ideas. Unfortunately, I'm not here to talk about those today. I am deeply concerned with the direction we are going as a district when we draft policies that are overly restrict an administrator or teacher to use his or her professional judgment in his or her school or classroom. Each classroom has a unique set of circumstances, and the teacher should have the flexibility to make decisions based on their professional training. Policies do not effectively run a school or classroom. Our highly trained educators do. Recently, I was discussing the bathroom policy with my parents, who both happen to work at the high school as a teacher and a principal. In a matter of minutes, they were able to raise numerous concerns with the implementation of this policy. Without teacher input, those of us who are not in the classroom have very little idea of the practical application of these policies. Furthermore, doing so without teacher involvement erodes teacher morale and is not an effective way to build trust. I implore you not to get in the habit of drafting policies for every issue that is brought to your attention as a board member. Families should be encouraged to go through the proper channels, starting with the teacher or principal. I know all 4 principals. I find them to be very professional, accessible, compassionate individuals who truly have the students' best interest at heart. Let's trust these individuals more and rely less on policies. On a separate but related matter, I'm hopeful you as a board do not approve policy 2:140. Everybody knows what it states, so I'm not going to read it. Again, there needs to be proper channels to request and disseminate information. In my humble opinion, the spirit of this policy is not one that inspires transparency, teamwork, or trust within our district. This should not feel like a hierarchy with individual school board members on top. While the school board is the superintendent's boss, there is no reason to treat any of our district professionals like subordinates. I believe all stakeholders could do a better job operating as a team with the common goal of serving our students and making our schools the best they can possibly be. Thank you for your time. Thanks, Julie.
Okay, anybody else?
Can I have a moment?
Sure,
Is this a time for MSCA?
sure, if you like.
Okay.
Yeah.
Me too, this is my first time attending a policy meeting. But I've had, and with regards to the policy committee and with the MSCA, with what came out last week, I've had several people contact me and just have some questions that I would like to then ask the board with some of the concerns that have come up. And both of these, or one of these was already addressed by Jama, and that is the restroom access, which states that all students will be permitted access to the restroom at least 1 time per hour throughout the school day. A passing period will not be considered as restroom access if the passing period is less than 5 minutes. No student will receive any negative consequence for requesting to use the restroom. I think as teachers and administrators, I think the big issue with allowing or granting restroom access on the hour is unsupervised. Having students unsupervised could be multiple students at a time. It could be a whole class at a time being unsupervised during those times. And we had an unfortunate incident happen in Indiana a couple of years ago, and I know Jason Seymour personally. And through the whole process and interviews and the talks that he's had, the student that was involved in the shooting had used the restroom and left and got the guns at that time. So access, having unlimited access to use the restroom, and teachers not being able to tell students no if they ask on an hourly basis could really create some issues, not just unsupervised issues, but we also going to have issues with disrupting the class time, instructional time. If we do it, if we have a 6-hour instructional day, that's could lead anywhere from 30 minutes plus losing instructional time, giving up on the hour or every hour student access to the restroom. So I think one big thing that comes out of this is, my students have multiple times during the day to use the restroom, as well as most elementary students do, junior high and high school. I don't think that there's a policy there. I don't think that teachers deny kids access to the restroom if it's warranted. But there are times when kids could ask every classmate to use the restroom, and it could be very disruptive to those teachers. I know there's times when we're doing tests, and if they have a 90-minute testing window, what are we going to do if this policy is put in place? Are we going to stop our test, allow all the kids to use the restroom, and then continue the test when that happens? We do our MAPS testing 3 times a year. All the teachers are doing MAPS testing at different times throughout the day. If each classroom is testing at different times and they're all releasing at different times, it's going to be pretty disruptive in the hallways while we're trying to test. We also have our IAR testing as well, and science testing that we do in our district as well that's longer than an hour. So those could be disruptive during those testing windows. So that's the big thing with the restroom access, is just the disruptiveness that this policy could provide throughout the entire district as a blanket policy. The second one I think we talked to a while back was the movie policy, and the way that it's stated with 48-hour notification. If there's a movie that the teachers are going to show, giving 48-hour notification on that. There are instances where things come up where if we need a sub right off the minute, where a teacher needs to leave in an emergency, if there's a lesson or something that would be difficult for a sub to come in and do at the last minute, then be able to provide a movie or some type of instructional video or something that would be conducive in the classroom at that time. This policy could create issues with that. So I think there's some things to think about with the movie policy still. The other thing that I wanted to mention, over the last 5 or 6 years, there's been a big push between the admin and the MSEA to make sure that we are following the proper chain of command within our district. And I don't know the reason for these 2 policies. I don't know if it's parent-driven, if it's student-driven, but if parents aren't going to the classroom teacher when they've got concerns, if parents aren't going to the building principals when they have concerns and going straight to the school board and asking how can these issues be fixed, and then the school board then coming up with policy without talking to teachers and admin, we're breaking that chain. And so while we try to instill that professionalism within our district, within our own staff, we would like to see that happen as well throughout our district with students and parents. I know I've had multiple staff members approach me feeling like things are starting to be micromanaged in our district, and I hope that's not the case, because that's going to make it harder to replace staff when they retire. It's going to be harder to replace admin when they move on into different positions. We want to get the best people that we can in our district, and I don't think management is going to be the best way that we're going to get the best people here. The best people don't need to be micromanaged. We have a very professional staff. We make great decisions on a daily basis, and it'd be nice that we would be able to still have that ability and afforded that professionalism to make those decisions. So that's all I have.
Can I just ask a point of clarification?
Sure.
So you said policies. I'm assuming you're talking about 2140 for the communication.
The communication.
Is that right?
More of the policy that I was referring to are just the ones that are directly related to when, like, if we've got an issue that someone has, they go directly to Dr. Hall on an issue instead of coming to the MSEA with an issue, or going to the building principal and trying to get that issue worked out. And then I go and I meet with Dr. Hall, our monthly communication meeting, and she goes, I had no idea that was going on, or I bring an issue, and then she might ask me Have they talked to the building principal? And we're like, well, we don't know.
So are you talking about board members? Are you talking about staff? Are you talking about parents? Are you talking about kids? Are you talking about all of those? I'm just trying to understand.
All of it in general.
All of it in general.
Yes.
So just an emphasis
Just
on
an emphasis on.
following the chain of command
Yes.
so that people can
Yeah.
make sure that everybody is in the loop as
Yeah.
necessary.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, anybody else? No? Okay. I'm not going to speak for Lori, but I just want to just reiterate kind of what this policy committee is for. We don't make decisions as a policy committee. Our role is to do the groundwork for the big board in the hopes that as we present policy in the larger board meetings, it's been fleshed out, it's been thought of, questions that we can think of have been answered. So I don't want you to think that we haven't taken your comments, but we as a committee have no decision-making power. What we probably will do is make sure that in the board packet, as these policies move forward, these concerns are listed out for the rest of the board members so that as the board has a discussion as a whole and has the ability to make some decisions, that we've done the work to say, with surrounding these policies, these are the concerns that we've heard thus far, open it up to see if there are more concerns. So I just want to make sure that you don't feel like coming here, you know, was a waste of your time. We certainly are interested and we appreciate the feedback. I just want to set the appropriate expectations so that you know that we don't really have the ability to make any decisions on our own, but we certainly appreciate you coming and giving us that feedback so that we can make sure that that follows with these policies as they move up to the board for consideration as a whole. Do you have anything you want to
And I
add?
appreciate you coming, since they are things that directly impact you in your career and your education, that you hear what they are, and then you have an opportunity to share with us. So thank you.
So is there anything else you want to, add, say?
I would just, to piggyback off of James with the two policies he spoke to specifically on the movie, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, and then on the restroom one, to create a broad policy, and for example, the restroom one, to create a broad policy that would oversee all buildings, the policy that would be in effect for elementary all the way up to high school. I think it's hard to do one that would broadly, because all of those buildings function differently, and so creating a broad policy on something like that is just
Okay.
very hard. And then the same thing with the movies and the clips and stuff. You know, say I'm in my room going to show a video on volcanoes or whatever it may be for science, and technology is not always reliable, and that video doesn't work that day, so I'm going to show video Y instead. But now I can't because I didn't tell the parents that it was that video instead of this video. And
Well, and
it dips into just a lot of, both policies would dip into a lot of academic time lost, and we already have a ton of academic time lost with transitions and just in general. I just think it would create more academic time lost with both of those things than actual gain from it.
Okay, so I just want to make sure that I'm hearing you right. So what you're saying is age appropriateness really needs to be taken into consideration here, and that buildings do have different schedules and they run a little bit differently. And so perhaps a policy that was structured more building oriented or age appropriateness would feel better instead of a blanket policy. Okay, I understand that. And then I just feel the need to reiterate on the movie policy because I feel like there's some confusion around this. The movie policy, when we were talking about the 48-hour notification, really is only when it's a motion picture rated movie that you're going to show in your entirety for the purposes. So clips, educational, anything that you would consider part of the curriculum, that is not what this policy was, when it was brought to us by Dr. Rummel. I don't believe that was the spirit of the policy when it was brought to us. And so I think as we've talked about it, there might have been a little bit of confusion about what that notification looked like and what it really pertained to. So we've had lots of discussion as the board. So I just want to make sure that we can communicate to you, since it came up again, that would not impact clips. It would not impact educational videos. It really was language that would be surrounding showing a motion picture movie in its entirety, you know, and doesn't have anything. So if you pull a clip from Toy Story about rockets because you're doing, that's not what we were talking about. So I think we as a board need to flesh out the language, but just so that you can appreciate the thought process behind it. It was certainly not to, you know, when Dr. Rummel brought it to us, I'm sure it was not for the purposes of tying anyone's hands. It's a delicate balance to make sure we notify parents appropriately and, you know, set expectations. But I don't believe that the spirit of that policy was ever to restrict educational and curriculum-based clips, and that notification was really for the purposes of when you were just going to watch a motion picture in its entirety, because that's the only pictures that we have ratings for anyway. And so I think it was in an attempt to appreciate that parents make different decisions when it comes to letting their kids watch motion pictures that are rated a certain way. And so we were trying to, I think, balance that. So there's been a lot of confusion, and people are talking about clips and talking about you know, curriculum-based things. And I just want to assure you that I don't believe anyone on the board thought that that's what we were talking about. So as we move forward, thank you for those comments. I think we have some language that we need to work on within that policy to really flesh that out. So thank you again for bringing it to our attention. I think we'll bounce it past you to make sure that, you know, as we move forward, we're doing what we're trying to do and not having consequences that we are not, certainly not intended.
I have a question for,
Sorry, I just want to say, I did not bring forward time periods for notifying parents as part of that policy.
No,
So
that's
I
true.
felt like when you said that, it...
Oh, I apologize. I just said when you brought the policy forward.
Okay.
So, you know, when you brought the policy, it was about movies and clips. It springboarded a conversation that kind of, I think, encompassed more than it originally did. And that's where the time frames and things started to come in. And so I think we took a policy and it was broadened for the discussion of how do we notify parents appropriately. And so there was some confusion added in. Dr. Rummel brought us a policy about clips, and then the board kind of had a discussion that springboarded from there.
I have two comments. Like, we're kind of off task. That's not on the agenda now. We keep going on that, so I apologize because I know you brought that up. But can I summarize? Wasn't your real main issue as MSEA is that if it was an issue, couldn't it have gone to the teacher could fix it. Then if you had to go to the administrator, you could fix it, and then go to the superintendent and us, because it came to us that we just, like, if it's it's something that's happened, this is our new expectation, please do this. But that doesn't just cover this policy for movies. It covers a lot of these policies moving forward. So I just want to make sure that I'm hearing that covers a
And
gamut
that's
of
why I
things.
brought up the chain of command.
Okay, and because I wrote that down.
I think a lot of these issues that have been coming up could be addressed at the very entry level of where that issue is.
And they wouldn't have to be here, but
I mean, it could be happen if there's a parent that's unhappy with not being notified when watching a full-length movie.
right.
Or a child not being allowed to use the restroom when they need to, could be addressed at the entry level, right, with the teacher first. And then if they're not happy with the response, then move on to the building principal. And that way we don't have to establish a board policy that's going to encompass every single person and teacher in the district to have to follow that. So I think if it's a small issue, it can be taken care of just by having conversations with people that are affected.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks for your input. Appreciate that.
More importantly, thank you for sharing that you worked with the administration as a union to get a chain of command that you felt comfortable with, just like you did today, but then you did in the last meeting too that Mrs. Revolution shared. So.
Okay. So with respect to these policies, I thought one way to handle this might be, I've read through all of these, and since we don't really make decisions on these policies, I thought we could handle it, seeing if there are any questions that we had, and if not, we'll just move through this list and we'll present this to the whole board for further discussion.
Like that.
Okay, so I don't have any questions on 140. Do you, Lori?
I have a question for it. When it says, so it says policy text through electronic communications with a majority of a board forum, okay? So we don't oversee the communication between the board members and the district employees. So how is this even considered to be a policy if it doesn't belong here? Because this specifically, that item says through electronic communication, but I don't oversee the communication with the board and I don't email school employees. So my question makes sense? Because the policy text there, it has to do with electronic communication, but then if you go down, that's a completely different area.
I don't know what you're asking.
I feel like I don't know if that's a question that I asked you or asked the committee of the whole, but that was a question that I have. And then if it goes down there in that whole policy question, if the employee denies a request, they must cite a specific law or policy that are concerned with and notify the entire board. If someone refuses to, I had a person say this to me, if someone refuses to answer a board member's question, is that grounds for dismissal even if they were rated proficient and excellent by their supervisor? Why can't the board member talk to the employee first? The same issue as the chain of command that Mr. Heinel and Mrs. Jones were talking about. Talk to the staff member first and then the administrator before it gets up. It's like it's just skipping. So those are my comments. I don't understand that. I circled at the bottom of that. If the employee denies us, I have a question about that, which may come up in the whole board, which is fine. And then I'm confused as it being electronic communication because I don't oversee the communication between board members and district employees, nor do I desire to do that.
Well, but this says that's existing policy text. So when you have electronic communication with a majority, it serves as a meeting. So I think that's the text from the policy that already exists, is that when board members are included in a majority or a quorum, the rules of that are different because that constitutes a majority.
Here's what I have an issue as a board member. I feel like there has been an opportunity where people have been speaking on behalf of the board, and instead of it's really not on behalf of the board, it's behalf of a question or concern that they have. I don't want someone to go out and represent my opinion as a board member. There's 7 of us. If it's their issue, okay? I think that's disrespectful. That would be like me pretending like, what if I came into your house and I redecorated your house and I didn't ask you, it's your house, I should ask you. So I feel like, in my opinion, if someone's gonna go out and ask information on behalf of the board, it should be not that way. It should be on behalf of them, and I think that's kind of the issues in the text. Maybe I'm reading and maybe I don't understand the policy, Megan, or Ken.
Okay.
So we can look at it, move it forward, and we can talk about it at another meeting. Those are the issues that I have.
So why don't we take those questions and add it to the document for the board packet for the whole board? Because I think it's important we capture those questions and have those discussions.
I hope this is okay. Please tell me if it's not. But can you just restate the question because I couldn't follow?
So, well, it kind of covers a couple of things that you have presented in here. So, and this isn't just you. I know it's been written that way, but it says down here, the bottom of the box here, it says if the employee denies a request, they must cite the specific law or policy they are concerned with and notify the entire board of their decision. Tell me about that.
If an employee denies a request, they need to have a reason for denying the request. That's all it's saying.
And that was drawn from where?
This is completely new text.
Right.
Everything that's not italicized is completely new text.
I got that. So that's where my issues are. I feel like it's we don't supervise the staff as a board member. And if you are doing that direct dialogue with them and you're asking them to be accountable to you, that's not how it works. The staff members report to their administrators, okay? If there's 7 of us, if we all went in and had 250 or 400 employees do whatever we wanted at every time, that is not a reasonable request, 1. But 2, we are not their direct supervisor. That's the way I understand it as a school board member. That's also the way I understand it as a school employee.
Okay, so why don't we add to this policy for a discussion of the whole board, understanding how the board makes requests for data. I think we've circled around on this. I think we need to come back to
There's
it.
opportunities that we get educated on this in our journal that comes and at conferences, and we all get the same information, so I don't understand how it's an issue, but that's where I stand on that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. So I think for purposes of making sure that that gets to the whole board, why don't we'll work maybe together and get something to Dawn that she can put in the packet for the
I always
board.
write notes on myself, so yes.
Okay. All right. So do you have any questions on 2 to 80?
Before it's moving forward, yes, in the best interest of protecting our students right now, I like that we would have a student representative. I think that the atmosphere that the board has been on in the last many months, I wouldn't want to subject a student to that kind of atmosphere. That's as a board member, and that's also as a social worker. I work with students who are traumatized every day. I don't want them to be in an area where they don't feel comfortable. That might be something we could look at in the future.
Okay. I had a similar thought is if the purpose is of making sure that we're representing student voices, is this really the best way to do this? Are there other avenues that we could go to that would expand our reach to more students? And a representative that sits on the board would probably have to be a high school student, but we have a whole body of voices that I'd like to figure out how to get to. So I like the idea of making sure that we start trying to figure out how to get student voices into the discussion. I'm not sure that this is going to accomplish that, but those were the thoughts that I had as well.
And we have, student council, principal advisory group, so we do have some things, but I'm totally right parallel with you. Like the idea of student input, maybe not at this time or this way.
Okay, all right. We'll write that up. Any questions on 311?
My comments were, I feel like we have a highly effective finance officer. I don't know why we need to add more layers to the pie. I put no reason to add more layers to reports and responsibilities to the superintendent when everything we need is created and available. And there were no legal references, and I just feel like it seems excessive.
Okay, I kind of read this as, are we doing a good enough job of making all of our public documents accessible? And so maybe we need to look through procedurally, what the website looks like, how documents are getting up, how timely they are, that whole process. Because I don't think this is asking for any information that shouldn't already be available, but I think it calls to question whether or not it's as available as we think it is. If we're hearing feedback that says I'm looking for stuff and I can't find it, then it's probably time to revisit how that's organized and what the procedures are around that. I think a lot of this policy, you hear me say this a lot, bounces back to procedure. Policy and procedure go hand in hand. You can't have effective policy without effective procedure. And so I think a lot of this probably dictates that we look at the underlying procedure to make sure that it's supporting what our policies already say when it comes to getting people public information and access.
I think that's the same thing. Like actually, that's kind of a continuing theme for the day. Is that what is the procedure in place that makes it like this way? I agree.
Okay. Any questions on 411?
Well, I have a question on the explanation part. And I am by all means not an expert on the TIF, but it seems like there's some information missing. I went and did some research so that I could figure out how the process works and gets down to that. But is there something underlying that makes this need to come into play? When I went back historically, I looked when it was discussed, and so and maybe you can't answer that. But the biggest question that I have, here's my main question that I'll see Megan and I'm going to say Ken, just since you're the one that did this. On the back side of that page, it says, any vote on matters relating to TIF districts and conducted by a roll call vote will require a 3/4 majority of board members attending the meeting to pass. Why not the simple majority? That's different than the way we vote on other things. The legal reference didn't have anything to do with the school. I'm just, again, I'm concerned, like, where does this come about? Has there been something happen? Was there a procedure not followed? Is this a point that we need to, know that we need to follow this procedure, but why is the wording changing the way you vote on something and that kind of information? Those are my comments.
Okay. Yeah, as I read it, to me, it just emphasized that as the district makes decisions about finances, it's important that the whole board is really on board. And so again, procedurally, I think we should look at the process around voting and making very clear what the whole board thinks. So let's add those questions. And again, we can't really solve that with our committee of two, so I think that these are important things to bring and have as discussion points for the board.
And there was a point where Dr. Holland emailed us even too about it, so I appreciate that, Megan.
Okay. Okay.
But not this board. It was the last board, like when she emailed us to tell us about some things that were going on with us. January 2019. All right, thank you.
Oh, and January 2019.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, maybe that comes about because some of the board members weren't board members. And so I think that calls the question of how do we ensure that communication is flowing to all board members, especially if there's new, especially if there's been a transition, if decisions have been made. How does that communication flow to people who may be new to the board? Because I don't think I certainly don't have that email trail.
Yeah, she did that January 2019. But to be fair about that, I agree making that procedure more fluid. But I mean, to know that you can transition every single person with everything that's happened will be difficult, but it's something we're working towards, more information so that you have it. Because I was like, okay, well, we had an email about that, but that was not the board that is the board now. So.
Correct. Okay. All right. 7-135. Do we have any additional? We heard from a couple of our audience members and MSEA. Do you have anything in addition to that you'd like to add?
I have two comments. One from a high school student. Kids asked to go to the bathroom with the intent to disrupt class. Now you are permitting them to disrupt class. Now you can have each kid and the whole class be out using the restroom. It's a comment from a high school kid who's in school. I thought I should bring that point out. As a school social worker, I work with students who have individualized education plans. As a school employee, we have students who have accommodation plans, 504 plans. We have nurses. If a student needs to use the restroom every hour and it is not, maybe it is something that needs to be addressed at the school, with the teacher, with the administrator. Maybe they need an accommodation plan because they have a medical issue. I don't want to deny a kid the access. However, it seems quite excessive to do this. We also, in addition to what Mr. Heinold shared about the incident at Noblesville, we have substances that can be used in the bathrooms at different times. I just feel like you're opening a can of worms if you give everybody a permit to go out and do that. So if it's an issue with a particular individual student, do they need a plan? Do they have a medical reason? Do they need it done? Let's take care of it that way. We don't need to do something like this. That's my opinion.
Well, I guess I'm just going to say policy is the way that we formulate the rules. So if we procedurally need, I have heard from several students, I don't drink during the day, I don't eat during the day because I can't go to the bathroom. That is not at the younger ages. This is kind of up in those. That's problematic. I mean, you have UTIs, you have all sorts of medical reasons that kids, so to me, there is a need. I don't think an individual plan for each person is going to work, and yet at the same time, the way that we do things is through policy. So I think the idea of there seems to be a need that we're not addressing, and maybe it's not at all levels, maybe it's handled differently in the lower level buildings because they plan that into their day in a way that you don't at those higher level buildings. At the same time, I think there are needs not being met, so the only way we can do that is through policy, and so maybe we need to look at this policy, but I don't think we can say we just handle every single kid as a one-off if there's a need that's not being fit. And maybe what we say is, maybe there's clearly people have come with a concern now as a board, we have to decide how do you best handle these concerns.
I realize.
So I think
we
the
have
discussion
3,200
needs to take
students.
place, but we have to have the discussion around something that we have control over, which is a policy.
I think it's probably a lesser, my opinion, issue than you think it is when you have 3,200 students. And I think, the parent going in or the student going in and saying something. I mean, I talked to a girl at the dance competition the other day who turned around and asked me about it. She was a high school student, not a dancer, and said, I go to the bathroom every hour. I come in, I drop my water bottle. She said, I drink water all day long. I drop my water bottle off on the desk. I tell the teacher I'm going to the restroom, and I come right back. So, I mean, as you have somebody who has an issue of not going, here's a student who does go. So I just...
Well, I think what it says to me is we need to do a better job of communicating with our kids to understand the scope of this problem. So the way that we do that as a board is around policy. We can't really, that's the limit of our scope of influence is setting policy. So I guess what I would like to say is the board needs to discuss this around a policy to figure out how we address and understand the scope and breadth of this, and then what the correct fix is, and if that looks different in different buildings.
That's your opinion. I think that you could address it by saying, this has been an issue, staff, it's been brought up. Can you work on this to make it be an issue that is not dealt with, instead of having to take time to write up a policy, spend our time.
But we can't direct staff except through policy. So we
We
can't
direct Dr. Hall to do it. That's what her job is. We say, Dr. Hall, this has come to us. Again, it came as a policy. Was it I don't know. I don't know the background. It doesn't say in this little paragraph. Was an issue that it was brought to the school? Was it brought to the teacher? Was it brought to the principal? Was it brought to Dr. Hall? It was brought in a policy. It went straight up, which we took people out of the decision-making process. That's my opinion. I'm not going to change it, but I respect what you say too. But I'm just telling you, I think it's just a little bit. It's just a little bit out there.
Okay. Well,
That's my opinion, and you have yours, and that's fine, and that'll be documented.
so we can just add all of these to what we'll send to the whole board.
I mean, and I also, who will monitor, who will enforce? What will happen if you're on a field trip and a kid can't get up to go to the restroom and you're on a bus? I rode the bus back from the trip when we went to Phoenix. We got off the bus and we had we didn't have a place we could go to the bathroom at first on the airport because we had to go through security and that kind of thing. And the kids, we were like, oh, you gotta wait, I mean, how do you monitor all of this? Just, again, it's 3,200 students that we have. If we start customizing policies for every student that we have, when are we going to get anything done?
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay. Press 102 policies. Did you have any that you saw that were concerning or had questions to? I know that there were a subset of these that had some procedures that had to go along with them, and you were going to do a little work, Lindsay, on connecting with staff. Have you had an opportunity? Do we still need some time on some of these?
Yeah, and that's what's in this pile.
Okay.
So not coming forth because they're just more in depth, and there's certain staff members that.
Okay. Do you mind
Good.
saying which ones
Sure.
those are?
They're not on that list.
They're not on this
No.
list. Okay.
So what's on the list is what the policy committee would hopefully send forth to the board next
Okay.
week for a first reading, with the exception of 430, 520, and 720, which have legal timelines to implement. And we have another board policy which does allow the board to introduce and adopt on the first meeting if there are timelines. And the actual language on that is except when necessary or prudent in order to meet emergency or special conditions or to be legally compliant. So those three, 430, 520, and 720, are the ones that the board needs to take action on January 21st. And specifically with policy 520, there's a resolution that the board must pass by February 9th, and there's not another board meeting prior to that. All of the others hopefully you've had a chance to look through, but there are several where the board needs to just answer a quick yes or no question. And I don't know if you want to do that here, or if you want to do it, and then your whatever action or decision you make here goes to the full board, or if the full board should just answer the question. They're not major questions, they just kind of feed into the procedure. So
My thought was we could give our recommendation. That might,
okay.
you know, at least I feel like
Megan or all of them?
for all the ones that require answering
Gotcha.
a question.
Okay.
So do you want me to go through those then?
Yeah, I thought we could do that way.
Okay,
So
so
105.
Go back.
if you can flip to policy 2105. The question, which is it's a 4-page policy there. The required question that has to be answered is, would the board like to authorize the board president or the superintendent to appoint the outside investigator when a complaint of sexual harassment is made against a member of the board by another board member or elected official? The default answer is the board president. The other answer you can choose is the superintendent.
I felt like the board, because it seems like a board issue, and that the board president is the default. That's what the IASB seemed to me to suggest as the default. I was comfortable with that.
I didn't have an opinion because I kind of wished it was both. I would rather have the whole board decide. But the default I was okay with as well.
Okay.
Well,
Which
I
is
mean,
the
we could certainly
I just
make a suggestion that the whole board. So you're saying by a vote of the whole board?
no. Is this one that has to go for next week?
No,
No.
it would have a first reading next week.
We'll just do the default. I'm good with that, and that would mean that the committee recommends that we do the default, being that it would be the complaint would go to the board president.
Okay. Then
Okay, next question.
110, right? Is
To
that-
110, the question is, would the board like to authorize the board president or the superintendent, whoops,
I know it's very similar.
it's, sorry,
Mhm.
these
It's the
policies are
same-
linked. I started to read it like, wait,
No,
it's
it's
the
the
same one.
same.
Yeah, so it's the same question, it's co-linked in.
It all has to do
in
with
this
sexual
policy.
harassment and investigation.
So I'm
So it's just
assuming that
adding
answers
to
the
language.
same.
I feel comfortable with the board president as
It'd
well.
be really weird if it's not the same.
I also like that too because I look at it being as two different entities of representing the population as a whole on the board. So yes, the board president default.
Okay, then we flip to 530. The default answer is no. It's a very lengthy question. I would recommend the default answer. This has to do with there's a new law that prohibits asking job candidates about their salary history, and that can no longer, this isn't just for schools, can no longer be a question that is asked. Some of that information is public due to the requirements that schools in particular have to post salaries on their websites. So that information is already publicly out there.
I think it has primarily to do with the hiring process, though. So you
Totally.
can't use it as decision making. So
Exactly.
I'm good with the default.
as
Go
am I.
okay with the default.
Mhm.
Okay, then last one is 830. Visitors to school property. If you want to, you can narrow the text of what it means, of of the definition of, let's see, being on school property, the recommendation is no, to not narrow that language. And so for the ease of the administration of this policy, the text is broader than what's cited in school code, which requires a hearing for both school events and school meetings based on that case. So what
It has to do with banning people,
Yeah.
so I wouldn't want to necessarily narrow text beyond the law. I
Yeah,
feel
me
like we
too.
should
for
go with the default and
all right.
shouldn't have a lot of need for that, hopefully, anyway.
And thank you, those are the questions.
So having done that, do you feel comfortable, Lori, taking this whole packet to the board? And I would recommend, I don't think it needs a second reading because most of these changes are either legal references or language changes that are inconsequential or a result of law that's been enacted, so we don't actually have any ability to not follow the law. And so I would feel comfortable suggesting that the board enact all of these policies.
For the Press 102 policies
Correct.
specifically.
Yes.
I'm in favor of that.
There's only 3 that have to be acted on. I
Right.
just want to clarify it.
Right.
And it's your decision. We would just need to know how to put them on the agenda. But you're saying the remainder of them just present and adopt next week for Press 102.
That's my opinion.
What your point out is that we just have to do the 3, but, I mean, if we have them, and I didn't have
I mean,
any
there's
issues with them, I'm
nothing
good with
there's nothing really substantial.
taking that step out, I agree.
I agree with that.
That might prevent something, I would like that.
I think it just allows us to kind of clear some things off of our agenda and to be a little bit more efficient
Yes.
when it
Best
comes
policies.
to, like I said, things we don't have any control over anyway when it comes to legally, and legal references are dropped off because they're no longer valid. I don't know that we need to vet that any further.
So I want to reiterate that again, that we would move forward with the review with action on the Press 102 policies only.
I would say that the committee recommends adoption of all 102 policies as presented
As presented.
to the whole board, including I would also probably in the packet want to highlight the fact that we are recommending those answers to those questions.
Yes, we will. So action item for that whole table there.
Yes.
Thank you.
Now, the other policies would go through like a policy normally be as a first read for them next week. The meeting on Tuesday, right? I keep thinking Monday, but it's not Tuesday. Okay. Okay.
That would be my recommendation. I don't see any reason to hold it up in this committee.
Nope.
I think it's
I agree.
prudent to have the discussion with the whole board at this point.
Sounds good.
Okay. All right, anything else? Is there any? Yes, of course.
There's a lot of talk about policies and whether you need policies to direct the superintendent to get something done in his school if there's an issue like, per se, the bathroom policy, and the only way to do that is a policy. I guess I feel like there's disagreement there, so I'd like to understand that better. And then also, in addition to that, if you have established procedures like the document posting, do you need a policy if you have the procedures? Those are just some of my questions.
I think they're good questions, and I think it's in line with what we talked about. Policy and procedure go hand in hand. And so I think when we stumble a little bit, I think we need to understand if the policies and the procedures are matching the outcome that we wanted. We can have policy and we can have a procedure put in place, and the outcome of the procedure doesn't fulfill the policy, and that's where we get into trouble. So I think understanding how those two things interact is pretty important for the board as a whole to understand if they're being effective with their policy.
Okay. So we have policies for the procedures already, so we don't need new policies for procedures? Not the bathroom, but more the document posting.
Well, the thing is that board can enact policy, and that's all that we can do. I mean, that's what boards are able
but
to
I heard
do.
disagreement on that that you could direct the superintendent to do something.
Well, you'd have to have policy that allows you to do that. So policy is the way that a board directs anything that goes on, is by setting policy. And then procedures are the tasks that support policy. So you have a policy and the procedures are how you enact that policy. And so they're pretty important that they line up. And I think in my experience, a lot of times when you have struggles, it's because the policies and the procedures are not in alignment or need a review or need a refresher. And so in terms of do we need to create new policy? It depends. Do we have procedures that maybe are in place and we just haven't tied it to a policy and people don't know about it? Sure. I mean, there's all sorts of possibilities there. I think, you know, as the board, part of what we're tasked with is ensuring that the policy and the procedure are in line. And I don't think anybody's interested in making policy for policy's sake. I think
Policies being made, so.
Pardon?
We are having a lot of policies being made where maybe one overall.
Well, we've had a lot of policies suggested. We haven't enacted a lot of policy.
But maybe a one overall more generalized policy giving you the authority to direct the superintendent to keep.
You actually don't need policy to do that. The majority of the board can direct the superintendent's work.
I just feel like we need to keep things more at the local level. I feel like the policy is, I watch the meetings and there's a lot of talk about in the weeds, and it does feel like that the school board is getting in the weeds. I want you to have a say. I think there's great ideas here. I like that you all come from a different walk of life. So I don't have a problem with that. I just think that we're taking too much control away from the schools.
I also feel that when you look at the transition that has happened in our district with superintendent administrators over the years, I mean, that's an opportunity for us community members. I'm not speaking as a board member to review and say, you know what, we have some things that people aren't familiar with now. Let's get them back to basics, you know. So like if we're reinventing a wheel of something that happened, that seems like a very much a waste of my time and my energy and the people that are taking the time to put forth the effort. If there's, it could be taken care of at a training level, you know, like, so I'm right there kind of where you are. And that's where I'm kind of discrepant between thinking that we need to make something new or we need to point something out, you know.
I'm not suggesting we make new or not make new. I'm suggesting that policy is the way that we are able to functionally run things. And so it's important that as a board and as a policy committee, we use policy in a way that benefits the district.
I guess I still like the viewpoint of that if something comes to our attention, we communicate that with the superintendent and let her know this is going on, and then she trickles that down to the administration and the team, and then maybe it's a problem that gets fixed and you didn't even have to do anything besides that. So that's where I sit.
Okay. I don't disagree. Okay.
Anything else?
Anybody have anything else? Okay. All right. So, entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thanks for coming, everybody.
Yeah. Thanks for coming. Appreciate it.